Okay, guys, we're going to make a start now. So, welcome everyone to our A Level AQA Biology session. Today is going to be our last lesson on nucleic acids, the content wise. From next week, we're going to be looking at just exam technique and exam practice on the whole of nucleic acids. So, this is our last content lesson on nucleic acids. And we're going to finish off by looking at water and inorganic ions. Okay, so we're going to start off by looking at the properties of water. We're then going to move on to inorganic ions. That's a really small topic. There's only one slide that I have for inorganic ions. And then we're going to finish off by looking at some exam questions. So we're going to have a look at a few questions on water and a few questions on inorganic ions just to summarize our understanding of the topic. And then next week we can have a full summary of everything that we have looked at by looking at exam questions, much harder exam questions um, over next week. Okay, so if we start, this is what the specification says. I'm going to start off by looking at water. And again, there's not really that much practical knowledge that you need to know on this topic. Everything that you need to know is literally condensed within the spec. It's like the GCSE spec where every point is noted. Every point that you need to know is noted on the spec. So we're just going to go through all of these points, and then we're going to move on to inorganic ions, and then we're going to move on to some exam questions. Okay, so first of all, we're just going to have a look at the structure of water. Okay, so a bit of an introduction about water, and we're going to start off by looking at the structure. So first of all, water is a dipolar molecule. Okay, so a polar molecule means it has one charged region. A dipolar molecule means that it has two charged regions. Okay, so it has two charged regions. And I'll show you a picture of this now in a minute. But basically, there's an uneven distribution of charge because we have H2O. Remember, what is H2O? We have an oxygen and we have two hydrogens. The oxygen, if you do chemistry, you will realize is slightly negative and hydrogen is slightly positive. And if I show you a diagram, this will make sense. Okay, so we've got this diagram. We know that the structure of water is just, we've got an oxygen, okay, and then that's bonded to hydrogen. All right, just a minute. Okay, that's bonded to just a minute. Why is this not working? Okay, that's bonded to two hydrogens. So we've got H2O there. Okay, that's the structure of water. Now, if we look at the periodic table, we know that oxygen has a negative charge and we know that hydrogen has a positive charge. And if you have studied chemistry, you would realize that oxygen is slight negative and hydrogen is slight positive. Okay, and that's because of the distribution of electrons around an oxygen atom and around a hydrogen atom. Okay, but if you don't if you're not familiar with the sort of delta positive and delta negative, don't worry, you don't need to know that for biology. Okay, but what you do need to know is that there are two charge regions. In water you have hydrogen and you have oxygen. Oxygen is slightly negative, it has a negative charge, and hydrogen is slightly positive, it has a positive charge. Okay, and what happens is that there are hydrogen bonds present between water molecules. Okay, so if we have water, we know that it's O, H, and H. So we've got delta negative, delta positive, and delta positive. Hydrogen bonds formed between the hydrogen and an oxygen atom. Why do hydrogen bonds form? Basically, a hydrogen bond is a really strong bond that forms between a hydrogen and one of three elements, N, O, or F. Okay, if you see a hydrogen which is bonded to a nitrogen or an oxygen or a fluorine, then that is a hydrogen bond. So in this case, as you can see over here, the hydrogen can attract an oxygen because hydrogen is delta positive and oxygen is delta negative. And because hydrogen is bonding to a oxygen, it's one of these three elements, N, O, or F. That means a hydrogen bond can form. Okay, and the fact that you need to know about hydrogen bonds is just the point that they are strong bonds. Okay, and they keep molecules together. And that will build onto a property that we will look at later in today's lesson. Okay, so that's all that you need to know for the structure of water. Water is a dipolar molecule, which means that it has two charged regions. Oxygen is delta negative and hydrogen is delta positive. Okay, and because there are two charged regions, it's a dipolar molecule because di means two, and there is an uneven distribution of electrons between the hydrogen and oxygen because one is delta negative and one is delta positive. And because you have two charges which are opposite to each other, they will attract each other. Okay, that's why you form a OH bond. Okay, so you have a OH bond over here. This is the molecule of water, but then multiple molecules of water will attract each other. So we have one molecule of water here, we have two molecules of water here, and we have third molecule of water there. Each of the molecules of water, they will attract each other because the hydrogen is attracted to an oxygen from another water molecule as well. And that's why you see when you're pouring water, water is a liquid, the water molecules stick to each other. Okay, it's like it doesn't drip 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 when you're pouring it all at once. It goes all in at once because all the molecules are stuck together by what you call hydrogen bonds. Okay, hydrogen bonds, they keep multiple molecules of water together so that when you're pouring water, or you're drinking water, water goes as a continuous column of water. You don't see drops of water going in and out. They're literally stuck together. That's why you see a rush of water. If you turn on the tap, the water molecules come out together. They're literally stuck to each other. If you pour a drop of water on your finger and then you try to stretch that molecule of water, what you will see is that the molecule of water will stretch until the bond has broken. Okay? Okay, and that's because of these hydrogen bonds. These hydrogen bonds, they allow the molecules of water to stick together, allowing them to flow from place to place. So that's a bit of an overview about the structure of water. Again, guys, if you have any questions, just let me know in the Q&A and I'll be happy to answer them for you. We're now going to move on to the 5 properties of water. So there are 5 properties of water, and we're going to go through each of them in a bit of detail. Okay, and they're nothing hard, they're very easy to remember, but they come up in exams quite a lot. So it's really important that you get your head around these topics. Okay, so first property is that water is a metabolite. And all that means is that water is involved in many reactions, such as photosynthesis, hydrolysis, and condensation reactions. And literally, if there is one statement that you need to know, the only thing that you need to know about this property is this statement: water is a metabolite. Okay, and all that means is that it's involved in many chemical reactions. Okay, so we've seen water in hydrolysis, we've seen water in condensation reactions. Remember, water is used to form a chemical bond and water is eliminated to break a chemical bond. That's what happens in hydrolysis and condensation reactions. We've already looked at that in biological molecules. We've not looked at photosynthesis, but again, water, as we know, water is used in photosynthesis to produce. In photosynthesis, what happens is that you've got your carbon dioxide and your water, which are your two reactants. They react together to form your products, which is glucose and oxygen. We've not looked at that, but you will look at that later in A Level Biology. In your second year of A Level, you will look at photosynthesis and the whole process behind that. Okay, so all you need to know about the first property of water is that it's a metabolite. It's involved in many chemical reactions. And I'm not going to go into any more depth at all because you don't need to go in much more depth. Okay, so property 1, water is a metabolite. Now, if we move on, the second property is that water is a solvent. Okay, now by this is what I mean. A solvent, you probably know that in chemistry or whenever we're sort of reacting anything, we normally have a solver. We have a liquid sort of solution. Okay, and normally we use water. Water is there to dissolve any substances in. So if you pour something into water and you stir it, it will sort of mix within water. If you put in sort of powder into water, mix it, the powder will dissolve into the water. Now, water is a really good solvent. Yeah, you probably used it at home. You've probably dissolved things in water before, and that's basically what this property is. The second property that you need to know is that it's a really good solvent. And the reason why it's a really good solvent is because it dissolves many substances into it. Okay, so for example, I mentioned powder. You can dissolve salt into water. Any small sort of particles of solid, you can easily dissolve in water. You can mix liquids into water and it will just dissolve. And if you dissolve sort of substances in water, it means that they can easily be transported because water is a liquid. Water is a solvent, which means that you can pour it from one place to another. Okay, and the reason why it dissolves, okay, so we know that it can be used as a solvent, but why can it dissolve? And that's coming back to the first point that we looked at, is that water is a dipolar molecule, which means that it has two charged regions. Because it has these two charged regions, these charged regions can interfere with the dissolved solid or the dissolved powder or the dissolved solution. And it can, what it can do, because it has two charged regions, these charges can interact with that solid or that liquid. And if it interacts, it incorporates those solids within itself. And that's what causes it to dissolve within the solution. Okay, so the slight positive charge on the hydrogen attracts negative ions, okay, in solution, and the slight negative charge on oxygen attracts the positive ions in the solute. Okay, so for example, let's say we had sodium chloride. Okay, we had sodium chloride. We know that sodium is positively charged and we know that Cl is negatively charged. So what actually happens? Well, the positive sodium ion literally just binds, is attracted to the negative charge on the oxygen. Okay, so attracted to negative on oxygen. The Cl minus is attracted to positive on hydrogen. And as you can see, because the hydrogen attracts the chlorine and the oxygen attracts the sodium, that means this compound NaCl, which is found in salt, can literally be dissolved within water, because the sodium would break apart and go and attract to oxygen. The chlorine would break apart and it would go and attract to hydrogen. This is why sometimes when you pour in salt, it doesn't dissolve straight away, it sinks to the bottom. Sometimes you need to stir it a lot within the water. You stir the salt within the water, and then that would break the sodium chlorine bond, and then the sodium can go and attract to the oxygen, and the chlorine can go and attract to the hydrogen. And then if you keep stirring it, after some time, the solid residue that builds up at the bottom will no longer be there. Okay, so that's a really good way of sort of remembering, of how it's a good solvent. It literally, if you put salt in water and you stir it for a bit, it dissolves. And that's why it dissolves, because the sodium is attracted to the negative oxygen, the chlorine is attracted to the positive hydrogen. If you stir it, it breaks the original sodium chlorine ionic bond, and then that will go and that will go and form a bond with the opposite charge, with the hydrogen and the oxygen. Okay, now if you have non-polar molecules such as lipids, they cannot dissolve in water. Now this is really important, because when we look at a later unit, which is cell membranes, you would need to know this point over here. Lipids can't dissolve in water. So you probably think that, okay, if you put in any solid into water, it will dissolve. That's not the case. Okay, so if you put something random into water, sometimes it won't dissolve. Okay, it will just stay there in the water, it will just sink to the bottom. And that's because there are no charged regions. Non-polar means that there are no charged regions. Okay, so no charged regions. That's what non-polar means. If you just put a blob of something into water, a blob of lipid, for example, into water, it's not going to dissolve. No matter how much you stir it, it's just not going to dissolve. And the reason why is there are no charges in that molecule. Okay, so even if you break up that molecule can't be attracted to the dipolar regions of water. It can't be attracted to the positive regions of water. It can't be attracted to the negative regions of water, because itself it has no charge. Okay, so that's why some molecules can dissolve. The polar molecules that have charges, that have ions within them, can dissolve. The ones which are non-polar, that don't have any charges, no matter how much you break them up, they will just sink to the bottom. They will not dissolve. Okay, and that's what you need to know about property 2 solvent. I've gone into a bit more depth on property 2 solvent just to help you visualize, but all you need to know that it's water can be used as a solvent to dissolve many substances in it. All this over here and this example was just to help understand why it's used as a solvent. Okay. Moving on, property 3 is that water has a high specific heat capacity. Now, if you did GCSE physics, which I'm assuming a lot of you did, this would make sense. But this is what you need to know about the point that it has a high specific heat capacity. Now, a high specific heat capacity means a lot of energy is required to raise the temperature. And this is useful because the temperature of the water will remain relatively stable even when the surrounding temperature fluctuates. Okay, and this means that it's important so that enzymes don't denature, providing a stable environment. We've already seen how important enzymes are when we looked at the enzymes topic at the start of biological molecules. Okay, um, so again, if we have water in our body, imagine it. If we go into a really freezing environment, let's say it's snowing outside and we just sleep outside, what's going to happen to our body? Our body is going to sort of start to shiver as a response because it's going to be it needs to respire, it needs to keep warm. However, your inner temperature will be relatively constant unless you've stayed outside for a really long time. Initially, when you go outside, it will stay relatively constant. And that's the property that water has. Our body has a lot of water in it. Water keeps that temperature stable. Okay. If you're in a really hot environment, again, water does the job to keep the environment relatively stable. So you can stay in that environment for a short period of time, and then when you come back, it will come back to its normal capacity. So it has a high specific heat capacity, so it can buffer changes in temperature. Okay, that's what the terminology that mock schemes use. Okay, high specific heat capacity to help buffer changes in temperature. Okay, a lot of energy will be required to raise the temperature. Okay, so it's really important that you have a lot of water in your body, keep hydrated. That's why they say keep hydrated. So that water will help you buffer that temperature, keep your temperature, your body temperature at its optimum capacity. When you're really ill, when you have a fever, when you go to the doctors, they will say drink a lot of water. When you have a headache, they will say drink a lot of water. The reason why is that water within your body, it will keep you hydrated, it will maintain the blood flow around your body, and it will ensure that the temperature of your body will stay relatively constant. Okay, so you won't keep getting repeated bouts of fever and etc. Okay, and again, why do we face symptoms? Because enzymes denature. If temperature is not kept constant within our body, enzymes will denature. And if enzymes denature, then enzyme substrate complexes can no longer be formed. If enzyme substrate complexes can't be formed, then many reactions that are needed to occur in our body will no longer occur. Okay. So that's property 3. And again, I've gone into a bit more detail there just so you get a general gist of why this is actually a property. Okay, but for the exam, if they ask you for a property, all you need to say is high specific heat capacity to help buffer changes in temperature. Okay, now the fourth property is that it has a large latent heat of vaporization. Okay, now a large latent heat of vaporization, what do you need to know? There are only 2 points that you need to know. Okay, a large amount of energy is required to convert liquid to gas due to hydrogen bonds. Okay, so remember, we saw that water molecules, when they are present within your body, you will have hydrogen bonds present. Okay, so we saw that if we had oxygen bonded to a hydrogen and hydrogen, if we had another molecule of water like this, we would have a hydrogen bond forming between the oxygen and the water, and same over here. So we had oxygen, hydrogen, we would have a hydrogen bond forming like that. Okay, and water molecules can stick together. Okay, so water molecules are able to stick together. Now, what does this actually mean? Large latent heat of vaporization. That means liquid to gas, a lot of energy is required to convert it. So if we have a lot of water within our body, there's a lot of hydrogen bonds within our body. Now, if we were just to go out, For example, for a walk, we don't lose that water, do we? That water doesn't evaporate from our body just like that, does it? That water stays in our body. Sometimes, if it's really hot, we start to sweat. Okay, why do we sweat? Because it's really hot. The water needs to escape our body to prevent sort of denaturing our enzymes. Okay, so it also provides a significant cooling effect. So this is the point that you need to know for exams. Okay, so if you're talking about large latent heat of vaporization, it provides a significant cooling effect. So if you're really hot, so if you're in a really hot environment, you start to sweat because water, the bonds of the hydrogen bonds are being broken, and when they're being broken, the water is able to escape from your body. Okay, it's able to escape from your body, and you start to sweat. Okay, and when you release sweat, you release energy to cope up in that sort of environment. Okay, so it has a large latent heat of vaporization to provide a significant cooling effect. That's the point that you need to know. Okay, and now finally, our fifth property is strong cohesion. Okay, and this builds on the point um, of what we've already looked at about hydrogen bonds. So we know that water molecules stick together by hydrogen bonds. Okay, and I've already shown you a diagram of how water molecules can stick together. This can be useful in providing cohesion. Okay, so in a xylem, we always use the term continuous column of water. Why is it a continuous column of water? It's basically because the water molecules literally stick together. Okay, if we put in a column and then we sort of soak up water through the column, what's going to happen is that water is going to go up, not in sort of gaps, like one molecule of water at a time. It goes up as a continuous column of water. Okay, because the water molecules literally stick together while they're going up the straw. Okay, same thing if you're drinking water using a straw, when you're pulling up the water goes together sort of as a continuous column of water. It doesn't break at any point. Okay, so that's what cohesion is. It's emphasizing that water molecules stick together by these strong hydrogen bonds. And the second point is surface tension to water. Okay, so there are invertebrates, so small invertebrates that move and live on the surface of water, provide a habitat. So there are some animals that live on water. And how do they live on water? You're probably wondering how they live on water. They're only small and they live on water. That's because of the cohesion, the surface tension of water. They are able to make the water as an environment, and they're able to just live on the water, move along the water because of the surface tension, because of the cohesion tension between the water and those specific small animals. Okay, and that is their habitat, that's where they live. So it also provides a habitat within the wider environment. Okay. Okay, so we've done everything about water now. This is everything that you need to know about water. So hopefully that's made sense. If you have any questions, please do let me know. But now we're just going to quickly move on to um, inorganic ions. Okay, so inorganic ions, switch in the spec. This is what the spec states for inorganic ions. And this part over here, you don't really need to know at this moment in time. Okay, because this is rather basic, but it gets covered in much more detail down the line. Okay, when you look at more topics, obviously this is the start of biology. When you go on, moving on to more sort of longer topics, harder topics, this will make this will be more applicable then. But for now, what you need to know is basically this table over here. Okay, and this is the only slide that I have on inorganic ions because at the moment this is everything that you need to know. So inorganic ions. Now, if you do chemistry, again, this will make sense. Organic is anything containing carbon. Inorganic means that it doesn't contain carbon. So it doesn't contain carbon. So inorganic ions don't contain carbon. They are inorganic ions in solutions of the cytoplasms of cells and in the body fluids of organisms. So they're all around the body basically. And these are the four inorganic ions that you need to be able to explain in detail. So iron, okay? Fe2 plus, that's the chemical formula, and it's a cation because it's positively charged. Okay, iron, you probably are aware that it is found in hemoglobin and it is involved in the transport of oxygen. Okay, so this is probably something that you're already aware of, but again, there's a whole unit on hemoglobin and oxygen and the sort of dissociation curves down further down the line. Okay, but at the moment, you're basically saying that iron is in hemoglobin and it helps with the transport of oxygen. That's one of the roles that iron has. The second ion that you need to know is hydrogen ions. Okay, and this is also a cation because it's positively charged. Okay, now again, hydrogen ion, positively charged, and again, you've probably heard of H plus and OH minus if you do chemistry. If you don't do chemistry, it's sort of a build-up from GCSE. H plus will determine the pH of solutions, therefore the functioning of enzymes. So the more hydrogen ions that you have, the more acidic your blood pH goes. Okay, so if we need to determine the hydrogen ion concentration, that will determine the functioning of enzymes because enzymes will denature at a too low pH or a too high pH. So again, you want it to be at the optimum pH, so the optimum concentration of hydrogen ions. The second, so again, that's something that you will probably already know from GCSE chemistry. The next ion is something that you might not know, sodium ions, another cation, and it's involved in the transport of glucose and amino acids across plasma membranes. There's a whole unit on co-transport and transport across membranes, so don't worry if you don't understand this now, just know that it's involved in the transport of glucose and amino acids across plasma membranes. Okay, and the final ion is the phosphate ion. Okay, it's an anion, PO4 3 minus, and it's formed in many of the things that we've already looked at. It's found in the backbone of DNA, RNA, and also ATP. So we looked at ATP in our last lesson. It's found in ATP. We saw the three phosphate groups which are attached. The inorganic phosphate groups. It's found in ATP, it's also found in DNA, and it's found in RNA. Now, the part in RNA we will look down further down the line, but at the moment, it's already something that we have come across. So the only new thing from this slide is basically sodium ions, but sodium ions come in our next unit when we're looking at transport across membranes.